Listening to this podcast is a privilege. Let's talk about The Housemaid.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're here to discuss The Housemaid. But before we get into that, Daniel, do you want to let the people know what you've been watching recently and why they should watch it?
So, I'm currently in the middle of my annual Star Wars rewatch. For some reason, every December between Christmas and New Year, I'm kind of in a Star Wars mood. Like in previous years, I'm watching my personal custom viewing order, which is Episode 3, Rogue One, and then the original trilogy. And that's my Star Wars. So, Episode 3 gives you everything the prequels are supposed to do. It's the actual Galactic Civil War itself. It's the rise of the Empire. It's the fall of the Jedi. It's the fall of Anakin, the rise of Palpatine. It's the Republic turning into the Empire. So anything you would want out of the prequels, it's in Episode 3. Rogue One is just solid Star Warsiness, and it's also the only one that's actually a war movie, or at least for large parts of it feels like one. And it kind of shows, I think it's still a very good realization of what the early days of the rebellion under the rule of the Empire were like. And you've got the original trilogy, which is just the classic story. And to me, that's my Star Wars. So those are the 5 movies that I rewatch every December. And that's what I've been doing. And it's been a good time.
I do need to go back and watch the original trilogies again at some point because I think I've only ever watched it once. But for me, Rogue One, best Star Wars movie, hands down. Like that's one that I completely fell in love with. And it's you know me, I kind of have some type of aversion to older movies. Like I don't hate them, but I always prefer a little bit newer movies. And Rogue One just hits the sweet spot in terms of the right level of Star Wars, right level of sort of rebellion, etc. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think the thing about the original trilogy is number one, how the entire thing is just one big lucky accident. Like it wasn't really planned. It's quite bumpy in a lot of places, but the pieces just all come together. And then, especially in 5 and 6, it really comes into its own in terms of like where Luke is going in the story. And it's also striking how simple it is. People kind of are overthinking Star Wars in a lot of the time, where they think it has to be this very specific thing, or it's like it's got these very specific moving pieces and whatever. And it's kind of pulpy sci-fi action with larger than life characters and just wondrous locations. And I think Star Wars would have been much better off if they had just kept going into the future, just with that attitude, and just go to new places, new characters, new conflicts, and just take that spirit as opposed to circling the same couple of events, because that's what's worked for 40 years ago. And just going back to the original trilogy not only gives you a classic story and a good story, it also kind of reminds you of how simple the stuff can be and how much fun it can be, which is something that's kind of been lost in like modern stuff, I think.
Agreed. For myself, I watched Wake Up Dead Man. And it's actually very funny because we were just having a conversation about watching movies with family just offline. And this is one that I tried to put on with my partner's family. And there's a bunch of kids around. And this movie started out talking about, with the priest talking about how often he masturbates and dicks being drawn on the side of buildings. And it was very quickly, we need to switch this movie off for the time being. And then I had to rewatch it on my own. And they were talking about like the Virgin Harlot Hall. And it was just one big disaster. I think we lasted about like 10 minutes into watching it together. But then I put it on by myself, and it's kind of what you've been same as what you've been getting in previous Knives Out movies. I think the murder mystery is really fun. It's really interesting. It's got like a nice little twist to it as well in this one, where you kind of start out with the suspects as opposed to starting out with Benoit Blanc, who's the main detective. So you kind of get to know the people behind. You get to know the suspects essentially, and get a deeper understanding as to who they are and what their motivations are a little bit, to then kind of help piece together who might have done it. And this one was, quite complex in the fact that it's like a priest going into a locked room with only one way in, and somehow he's been stabbed in the back and he's been killed. So it was like a fun little twist on how did this person die and like how did they possibly commit this murder. Overall, I think it's just kind of fun. It's great. It's entertaining. Nothing spectacular, but it serves up a good murder mystery, which for this time of year is good job enough.
Is it a proper mystery where the clues actually matter and you can actually solve it, or is it something else?
I would have to rewatch it because it's one of those where you can kind of see where things were happening, and like you kind of notice things as it's happening. But I think it would warrant a bit of a rewatch. And once you kind of know actually what happened and how it happened, I mean, they definitely like once it's resolved, they definitely did lay all the pieces out in terms of like, here's a story and here's like, things that you don't think are related but come together and actually are related by the end of the story. But it need a second rewatch just to kind of see those like finer details.
Yeah, because that's kind of what makes or breaks a mystery for me. Like if it's not, if it doesn't actually make sense, and if you just reveal the answer at the end, but there was no way to actually get it, I have a hard time getting into it. And all I know about the Knives Out movies is that Ryan Johnson is attached, and that kind of makes me question how good the story can be. But I don't know, like maybe I'm wrong about that. That's why I'm asking.
I think it does a good job of it. On to the main event. Daniel, do you want to give the people a synopsis of The Housemaid?
So, The Housemaid is an erotic thriller which follows the story of Millie, who has recently been released from prison on parole with the condition that she find steady employment. And so she takes a job with the Winchesters, who are this wealthy family, and she's basically hired to be a housemaid. She quickly discovers that the wife of the household, Nina, is completely unhinged and psychotic and is trying to sabotage her at every step, framing her for mistakes and being unreasonable and not respecting her privacy and all sorts of, like, basically everything an employer can do wrong, she does wrong. And after a while, Millie starts to discover that there's more to the story than it originally seemed, and the story unfolds from there. So what did we think of The Housemaid?
I thought it was good. Not perfect, and probably a little bit longer than it needed to be. I think they could have kind of trimmed the fat a little bit on it. Because I think towards like the kind of middle point, it kind of spins its wheels a little bit. And, they kind of hammer home the point that Millie is unwelcomed in this home by the wife. But I think it was interesting. It was predictable in terms of, how the story was going to turn out and who the actual real bad person in the story was eventually going to be. But I think there was still some interesting revelations in there about the characters, about Millie specifically, and kind of who she was in a previous life, and kind of what she represents and stands for. And I think we're kind of getting to like some of the fine details in terms of the themes and the topics that are kind of discussed in this particular movie. But I think well acted as well. I think everyone kind of did a solid job. It's actually funny. What's the male actor's name, or like whoever plays the male actor in this? He's like heavily touted as being a good Batman, or a good choice for Batman, and I just had that in my head because he's like one of those like people that the fans cast, and like for most of the movie I was like, would he be a good Bruce Wayne? Would he be a good Batman? And I actually kind of think he would, which is funny coming out of this movie, but I actually could see him playing a Bruce Wayne / Batman. Yeah, I think overall this is like a good fun time. I think again it's not a perfect movie, but it's enjoyable enough and it has like a good twist to it, and I think the revelation and the kind of the story behind it is interesting as well, is what I'd say.
All right, so I was very much on board with this movie in the first half. The first half is basically very glossy, very polished, very highly produced trash. It's very dramatic. I think the characters are they're kind of laying it on thick, and it initially starts out very simple, and then over time you start getting more and more wrinkles to that, and then you start seeing kind of that the picture gets a little bit muddier than you originally thought, but not by much, right? Like it always remains, like, at least in the first half, as a very archetypical story in terms of how its story plays out and whatever. And then at the midpoint, they basically just tell you what the answer is. And then kind of the second half is kind of the fallout from that reveal. And that's kind of where I threw my hands up in the air and said, movie, you're cheating. It does a thing that Longlegs did a year ago, where it's a really tight thriller in the first part of it, and then at the end they just tell you what the mystery is, or what the answer to the mystery is. And here they do it at the midway point, which I think we can talk about whether that makes a difference. But I did not feel like, number one, just telling us the answer was in any way, and like telling us what was actually going on in the Winchester household, was actually a good way to do it. And secondly, from that point on, I don't think, once you know what's going on, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. And even though it feels like it's a very meticulously put together mystery, it ends up not kind of being one, because I don't think it's careful enough and detail oriented enough and doesn't try hard enough to really make all the pieces make sense, because a lot of this is about perception, right? Where in the first half, Millie sees kind of the image that Nina and Andrew are projecting. And in the second half, we see their real personalities. And it's supposed to be an aha moment where we say, okay, now it all makes sense. Now there's all the weirdness, all the strange behavior. Now it all makes sense. And I don't think it does. Let's talk about it.
Right. Wait, do you want to start with the big revelation?
Yeah, we can start with that. So throughout the entire first half, it looks as if Nina is just psychotic, right? Like she's acting erratically. She has extreme mood swings. She's seemingly forgetting things where she insists she did something when we know she didn't, and that is what gets Millie into trouble. And she's so desperate and in such a precarious situation that she just has to take it, right? Like when Nina accuses her of having thrown away the script for her PTA speech, or when she is said to pick up Cece when actually Cece is supposed to go with a friend for a sleepover, when Nina gifts some expensive clothes to Millie and then later accuses her of having stolen them. There's no way Millie can really prove any of it, but she also can't walk away and she can't fight back, so she just has to take it. And Andrew is this hyper understanding and hyper patient husband who is in love with this mentally ill woman, and who is seemingly just dedicating himself to making this work and cleaning up after Nina and all of that. And then in the midway point, we see that he is essentially a kidnapper who has psychologically tortured Nina into behaving this way, and has basically given her the reputation of being mentally ill, so that anything she does is perceived as just craziness, and so nobody will take her seriously. And Nina, throughout the entire movie, has been planning to make Millie kind of her replacement, so that she can escape that abusive relationship. And so she's acting extra crazy, and she's pushing Andrew towards Millie by making her seem more reasonable and easier to get along with and all of that. And I don't think when you really look at the details of how that unfolds, it really makes a whole lot of sense. In addition to that, my first big problem with this is just telling, we are basically told this in a flashback, right? Like Nina escapes and we see her kind of celebrate the fact, and then she writes a letter to her daughter where she explains everything, and in a voiceover we see how she met Andrew and how they fell in love, and then how he became abusive, and then how she basically has been living kind of under his thumb the entire time, and about how she then hatched this plan. So just this should be revealed through character actions, and through, like, Millie should discover evidence of this and then maybe confronts Nina, and then Nina tells her something, or Nina decides to tell Millie what's going on because she's changed her plan, or whatever it might be, right? There are lots of ways to do this, but just telling us in a voiceover, I think, is cheating, and I think is unacceptable storytelling.
So there's like a few parts to it. Firstly, the setup of it. You said it wasn't. Did you say it wasn't believable, or it didn't quite add up, or whatever? I thought it made sense. To a certain extent. I thought, she's kind of purposely picked out someone that already had a bit of a checkered past, knows that she needs saving. And Andrew's got this like savior complex. So she already understands that about his character. So all of the stuff that you see her do throughout the movie in terms of, kind of pitting herself against like Millie and, really making it difficult, and in certain instances doing it in front of Andrew so that Millie has something to complain about, or Millie has like a gripe that Andrew can like recognize and like step in and has to like speak up for her in different instances, or like has to come in and like save the day, or like be the reasonable one on her behalf. I don't know. I thought like when they explained it, I thought it was there. I thought it made sense, and there was like even some scenes where you could kind of see the mask slipping a little bit. I think it was like the scene where not Millie, the other woman, the wife, she was with Andrew's mum, and you could almost kind of see that there was like that element of not unworthiness, but didn't quite fit in, wasn't quite right, or she didn't feel in place next to her mum. So it kind of clearly showed that she and there was comments from the friends where they were saying that like she didn't have a single dime before she met Andrew and stuff like that. So she clearly wasn't of that world. There was like just like those few moments where I was like, there's something not quite adding up in terms of like why she's being so cruel and why she's being so evil compared to like how she was at the start. But once it was revealed, it just felt like it made sense in terms of how she was acting.
So I think there definitely are clues that something is up, and there are certainly moments or lines where that kind of a clue that there's something sinister going on behind closed doors, right? I think it's also clear that Andrew's mother is the source of all of this, right? That she messed him up and he's now continuing this when he's in charge, right? One of the symptoms of that is the whole thing about the privilege, right? That that is something his mom said, where she said something like "nice teeth are privilege" or something like that, and that then turns into something different for every person. Like for Nina, it's the hair. For Cece, it was something else, where she says something is a privilege. I think orange juice. Yeah, orange juice is a privilege, and so
I think there's a few things that she said were a privilege in the movie.
yeah, exactly. And then I think with Millie, I forget what it is with Millie, but that comes up again. That is certainly something that comes from the mother. And some of the things that Cece says kind of implies that, or kind of foreshadows a little bit what's going on. This whole thing about how she's not supposed to have ketchup because it's messy. There are certainly some things, right? It's not that there's nothing. I'm saying that some of the things that should be there aren't there, and there's not enough, I don't think, to make sense in hindsight. So one of them is that Nina does not act like a prisoner. So she has to have this elaborate scheme for getting away, and she tried to get away once with the fake passports, and Andrew caught her, and that is why she went into the mental institution for a year, where essentially she was broken and like psychologically broken, and had to admit that she was just crazy. And that is kind of what destroyed her legitimacy or her credibility in the eyes of everybody else. And that's kind of what gave Andrew kind of complete control over her, so that he could always manage kind of the optics of whatever they were doing. But I don't know, like I did not see like little signs of where, like seemingly, like I don't know exactly what prevents Nina from just getting in a car and driving away across state lines, and then she's free. I did not quite get what it was that actually kept her in that household other than the money.
And I don't know if it was like anything to do with being tied by marriage as well, where I don't know wherever she went, like it would like flag up or like because of the name or something like that. But I mean, if you're doing fake passports, then and also that part about that fake passports, why would you keep it in the house if you know doing fake passports? Why would you not store it elsewhere? Why would you not store it with the groundskeeper who was helping you out? And you know once you got out, he gave you the fake passports. That part like didn't quite make sense.
And there's also things like Andrew does not seem to be nearly as controlling as he should be. If all of this is true, like why can Nina drive? Why can't she leave the house? Why can't she receive friends? Like Andrew doesn't have complete control what she tells her friends or what they, like it's pure luck that they're all shallow idiots and all buy into Andrew's lies. But what if one of them didn't? Like what if one of them saw the signs of domestic abuse and reached out and tried to help? Like what would Andrew do then? It's supposed to be kind of this incredibly controlling, abusive family situation. And I don't know, maybe it's because I've not seen this up close, but like I imagine like in my head that kind of plays out as being extremely controlling and controlling who you can talk to and where you can go, and like why does she have money? As in, how can she not just stash away a little bit every month and then she has enough to just leave? You know what I mean? Like, if you're trying to control somebody, wouldn't you take away all of that freedom and all of that agency, and none of them appears to be happening?
That money part as well confused me because again in the movie they mentioned that they had like a really tight prenup where she couldn't get anything if they ever divorced, and at the end of the movie she just gives Millie $100,000 check after he died.
That's because he died. In the case of divorce, she would get nothing.
Oh, but yeah, because yeah, okay, no, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that does make sense. So her only way out was for Andrew to die. But then also, why did she not try this before, right? Like, why does she need Millie for this, right? Like, can she not just poison him? You know what I mean? So here's the thing, right? This entire movie like rests on this premise, right? Like of this seemingly perfect family, and then behind the scenes, there's all this abuse and control and psychopathy going on. But then I think in order to really sell this, you need to show us a reality that shows us why Nina is that stuck and why Andrew is so controlling and why it works. It's limited to pretty much the whole thing about if you make a mistake, you will get locked up in the attic. Basically starved until you give in and are made to do these self-destructive things as proof that you're falling in line now, right? With Nina, it's ripping out the hair. With Millie, it's carving into her stomach. Right? I don't think that's how abuse works. I don't think that's how you would control somebody's life like this. That's how you would construct a golden cage. Realism is not like, this is kind of like a deliberately trashy thriller, right? Where it's more supposed to be about the emotions than anything else. But I feel like in order to make the story work, you have to construct the scenario in a way that makes it believable so that you can say, yeah, I understand why Nina cannot leave, why she has no way out, why nobody will help her. And that is why she is driven to such extreme measures. I feel like that is what it would have taken for me to really enjoy the story.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to disagree, and I think there was like a few easy ways to resolve it. Like, one about her driving. They're rich enough; she could have had a driver. Like, she didn't need to sort of do all this driving
Yeah.
herself. And in this big kind of fancy house, for there to only be a groundskeeper as opposed to like any other staff doesn't quite make sense in terms of like if you're trying to control someone, if you're trying to keep them in check. I get you kind of have to like mask abuse from certain people, but the groundskeeper knew and he couldn't really do anything about it because of like who Andrew was and how much money he had and how much power he had, etc.
And Enzo helped get the passports for Nina, and they were found out, and Enzo wasn't fired. Not only is Enzo not on the side of Andrew, he's actively helping Nina. Why is he not immediately fired and deported?
But then he's fired for scaring Millie in the kitchen.
Which seems comparatively small, like a small issue, right? It like, see, like the reality of this, like, and or like Enzo specifically, like he comes across as kind of the creepy guy who is hostile, and like why is he hostile to Millie? Why doesn't he warn her? No, stay away from this family. He says something like, you have no business being here. But that is not a warning, that is a threat, right? Like, how is Millie supposed to take this? Oh, I should run.
I guess he had like that pact with Cece in terms of they had this plot and they were kind of setting up Millie and she told him not to say anything, even though then
Was he in on that?
when she was kind of doing her big spiel, she was saying about like how Enzo didn't agree with it, but she made him kind of fall in line a little bit and just like agree to go along with having Millie come in.
But then why is he threatening her? Why is he not making her feel more welcome? So, oh, this is such an amazing family. I've worked for them for 10 years. They're incredible. Just do what Andrew says and you'll be fine.
The only thing I say is he didn't agree with it. He didn't agree with like the plan that Cece had laid out, and she did mention that. But again, like you're saying, is like you then still don't have to be hostile. Like you don't have to
Mhm.
be threatening. Like it's either you tell her to leave or you kind of fall in line and go with the plan. Is what I'd say.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's just a fake out. Like in the beginning, when we first see him, he seems to be he comes across as a bad guy, right? Like he's hostile, he's sticks to himself, he's always watching Millie, he's always antagonistic. But then he turns out to be the good guy, and that's just a very cheap reversal, I think, where that kind of reversal needs to be earned, and you earn it by making it make sense in hindsight. And I just don't think it does. Like once we know what Enzo's deal is, we don't understand, we don't see his actions in a different light, where what he intended as a warning actually came across as a threat or something like that, right? You know what I mean? Like it's not like if you rewatch this, the things Nina and Enzo do take on a different connotation because now you know the background. I don't think that's it.
I think likewise with Andrew as well. I think it's very obvious that he's the bad guy in this because of how overly nice he is and how like on the nose it is. That is it Nina or Cece?
Cece's the daughter, Nina is the wife.
See, okay, yeah. It's very obvious that Andrew's a bad guy just by how like overly nice he is and how overly terrible Nina is in this. Like you can kind of see the plot twist from a mile away coming.
See, the entire time I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like somebody this nice has to be the bad guy, right? But then it keeps going on, and he's still the nice guy, and he still has this impeccable act together, right? And by the time they go to the opera and they have this romance, right? It seems to me like at that point I was thinking, okay, maybe he is the villain, but he's the villain because he cheats on his sick wife, not because he's an abuser or something like that. You know what I mean? And that is the twist. And then the twist to the twist is, oh no, he's actually the most cartoonish psychopath you've seen in years in a movie.
Yeah, and like some of the punishments that he was like kind of like dishing out didn't quite make sense because it was like especially the one that he did to Millie. It's like you want this perfect image, you want this woman like that goes
Yeah.
out, represents the family, and is like is well presented, but then you get her to carve out 21 lines on her stomach, and it's like,
How are you going to explain those scars? Next bikini season.
yeah, exactly, yeah, that's it. That was exactly my thoughts, and I was like, that's gonna cause further issues down the line. So it's just like it just doesn't make sense. Like I was gonna say when you have like an abuser that's kind of covertly trying to abuse someone, you're meant to do stuff that other people won't see. It's like in places where like so you don't hit in the face and stuff like that. You're meant to like hit them, and again, it's like the right place, but it's like the wrong punishment because you've asked her to cut herself. and it's not just like bruises that will heal up over time, and then by the time someone sees it, or by the time it's bikini season again, those bruises have gone away. It's like, no, those are permanent scars now.
Yeah, I was going to say this was not supposed to be a step-by-step manual, but like there are ways to abuse somebody in a way that doesn't leave evidence, right? And he's kind of just doing the maximum destructive thing. Another thing is that neither Nina or Cece seem to be afraid of Andrew, like in their day-to-day behavior. With Cece, there's a little bit where she's afraid of making a mess and that sort of thing, and she's always very timid, but she's openly talks back to people. She's defiant. Like she can't talk back to her parents, so she will give attitude to Millie because she can, and that's the only person in her life who can't punish her for it. Maybe that's the answer. But it seemed to me like this child should be traumatized and beaten down and timid and afraid to be seen. She should just be sitting in a corner hoping nobody notices her, because being noticed gets you punished. You know what I mean? Like it does not seem like the kind of family where this stuff is going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it looked like they had like a great relationship between the two of them, to be honest. And you kind of expect it from Nina because she's the one that hatched the plan, and she understands him a little bit more, and like is kind of further like has further brain development to like know how to like manipulate and like massage his like ego and like stay on his good side. So like from Nina, you can kind of expect it more in terms of how she behaves and falling in line, especially with her plan. But yeah, I agree with Cece. It was, apart from like the few odd comments of like how things should be, it's not giving of a child that has been punished several times, or like has been locked in the room for prolonged periods of time or anything like that at all.
Yeah, and you get much more extreme behavior from just strict parents who are not abusive, but who are just strict. Like children who grow up in that kind of household very quickly adapt to the idea of you don't upset your parents and you don't make mistakes and you're always perfect and that sort of thing. Like I've known, like growing up, I knew people who had somewhat strict parents, and like there was just a fear of upsetting them, and like a visceral fear, and that is missing from Cece entirely. And instead, she's kind of a spoiled brat, and just that doesn't appear to fit together. Another thing that doesn't quite seem to make sense is that if Nina's craziness is an act in order to drive Andrew away towards Millie and make Millie look better, so that Andrew thinks, okay, I'm just gonna, like, this one's broken, I'm gonna start off with a new wife, right? That's kind of her plan, right? Doesn't Andrew know that she's acting? Because she knows how she's been acting before, and he knows that she's not actually crazy. She's like everybody thinks she's crazy because he put her in a psych ward for a year. Like, unless she's been doing this for years and she's just pretended the entire time to take these antipsychotic drugs and they're really making her act this way. And then after a while, after she's convinced Andrew that this is real, then she brings Millie in. And then she seems more normal. Like Millie seems more normal in comparison. Am I just not getting something, or should this be really obvious? And shouldn't Andrew kind of go after Nina for clearly being up to something and hiring somebody who looks like Millie? You know what I mean? Like shouldn't he notice that there's something going on and be on the lookout? When at every other point it seems like he seems like he's not suspecting anything.
Mm-hmm. Hard to disagree with that, actually.
So here's the thing, right? Like I saw this in a full theater. Like it was also like my local cinema has a few large screens, a couple of smaller screens, and I saw this on the smaller screen, and that was almost sold out. So there were maybe 40, 50 people there, and they were into it. Like I was sitting next to these two women, I didn't know them, but they just happened to sit next to me, and they were kind of into it to a normal degree in the first half, and like eating their popcorn or whatever. And in the second half, they were really mesmerized. Like they were leaning forward and like really, really fascinated by what was going on as this abuse was being revealed. And it felt to me like it really resonated with them, as in like this is real and this is like showing it how it is and that sort of thing. And I'm kind of just sitting there, it's like this is completely falling apart. Like this is not how people behave in that kind of situation. And you are creating some spectacle, right, in terms of like big scenes or whatever that are kind of pretty to look at or fascinating to watch, like this showdown through the closed door. I think that's just a well-made scene, right? That is suspenseful, and it's kind of this duel of wits between two strong-willed characters and all of that. This is also getting currently 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences are just on board with this. They're just calling this a masterpiece, basically, to nearly universal acclaim. And even the ones who don't like it say it's at least wonderful trash. Like it's just fun to watch, and it's deliberately kind of lowest common denominator stuff, but it really taps into something. And I'm just sitting there saying, okay, you had me in the first half when they were laying out the pieces, and I thought something more interesting was coming. And then you tell me what the answer is, and the answer ruins pretty much all of it, in the sense that it's not compelling, it does not ring true, and it doesn't make sense. I don't know. Like I feel like it's a dangerous path to say I'm the only one thinking about this. That's kind of what it felt like in the cinema because everybody was kind of going for the cheap emotional beats, and I was saying, but this doesn't make sense. Like they're not behaving as if they're living in the reality that the movie is saying they live in. I don't know.
I get your point, and I think you kind of really like dig into it, but I also kind of understand it from the general like point of view because, like I said, I still found it good and entertaining to watch, whilst knowing that there were so many imperfections with this movie, and there was like so many like holes that you can poke at this particular movie. But I kind of understand like the general audience's view on it, where it's just like I think you could quite easily buy what it's selling. And obviously, what it's selling isn't high art, but it's selling a good time at the movies. And I think a lot of the time we kind of speak about the cinema experiences, and I think it kind of sold the experience without completely nailing the absolute atmosphere and the feel of it. And I think what probably drives most people towards it is just like the way that it twists and turns, at the halfway point where it's like, oh, like this is why it's that. And I think we probably should talk on the actual big revelation and how they kind of just like exposition dump all of it. Like to me, I was like, it's just like while it's interesting to know actually what the story was, and then to be like, oh, like and I already knew she wasn't the bad person in this, but whilst it was like interesting to know actually laid out there what actually happened, I was with you. I was like, there's a much better way to do this than simply writing a letter for your daughter. Especially because she'd written a letter for the daughter, but then they'd already escaped and they were having lunch together and they were like gonna go up, and she'd kind of succeeded in her plan. And it wasn't until the daughter decided that Millie should also be helped because she's also a prisoner that she decided to go back. So the whole writing a letter didn't quite make sense to me. But then just laying out everything, I was like, I'm with you. I was like, you could have found a better way to kind of reveal this, or kind of like start to pull at the threads and let everything come loose.
Yeah, and I think there are things to like here. So I do think the performances are good. It looks nice. I think it's well shot for the most part. Like at least it's not it's not ugly, it's not clumsy. On a technical level, I think it's fine. It's even good moment to moment. Like it gets the emotional beats right. When they need to be menacing, they're menacing. When they're sinister, they're sinister. When it needs to be glamorous, it's glamorous, and all of this, right? I kind of just like moment to moment, I really enjoyed this. It's more like if you actually think about what the actual plot is and what it's saying, that's kind of where it stumbles. And then, one thing I actually do like about this is about how the revelation doesn't come right at the end, but in the middle. And now I've been preaching this like a movie should change the rules in the middle. And this is exactly what this movie does. But this is kind of showing that if you use a technique like this, it's not automatically a good movie. Yeah, right? You still, like the other pieces still have to work. I do like that Millie finds out the truth in the middle and then has to deal with it. That is a much better way of doing it than if she just finds it out like 5 minutes to the end. And then there's like one scene where that's a big showdown and then it's over. Here, Millie has to live with the realization that she's now stuck with this monster and that Nina set her up. Like Nina wasn't even her friend. Like Nina never was her friend, but she was a threat in a different way than she thought. And then they kind of band together because they have a common enemy in the end, which still not entirely sure that it works when Nina actually comes back and all of that. But I do think like the moments really work, right? Like when Andrew kind of cuts his losses and says, okay, Millie is gone, but let's see if I can try to get Nina back. And she just tells him to get lost. That was a strong scene. I can totally see people clapping at that. There's all sorts of moments in this where I say, yeah, this is good. This is good. And I was on board with the movie for pretty much the entire first half, right? But it's just how it all hangs together in the end. That is the problem.
Yeah, I feel you. Actually, one thing we were kind of talking about, plot holes. Where did she get the knife from, Billy, when she was in the room? Because he kind of stripped the room bare in preparation for her and like took everything out. So it's a bit like, I don't know where the knife was hidden. Like I saw that and I was really like, I don't know. Like that one didn't make sense to me.
So there's a thing about Nina handling that knife, a scene before that. So it could have been that she planted it there, but then Andrew cleaned out the attic, leaving only the bed and the fridge.
And the bucket.
And didn't notice that there was a knife there. Like maybe he was in a rush, whatever, but it also wasn't shown that it was hidden, like somewhere where Andrew wouldn't look or something like that, right? And she just has it. So I do agree. As I was watching it, it felt a little bit rushed, but it seemed, at least they tried to set it up, but I'm not sure now how it works out exactly.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the themes that it kind of sets up in this? Obviously, it's quite heavy on, abuse, control, but also, it kind of, I wouldn't say, makes Andrew sympathetic, but it kind of shows where he learned that behavior from his mother. And you can also kind of see how it was like seeping into Cece a little bit in terms of like how she was like reacting to certain things, and like, how it was like affecting, altering her brain chemistry. But yeah, what are your thoughts on those themes and those topics that were brought up in this movie?
So there's definitely this idea of intergenerational abuse, right? And this is now in its third generation with Cece. I think for it to really work, I think it needs to speak to how this stuff really works, as opposed to kind of the cheap thriller version of it. And for that reason, like if you are either trying, like as predicted, all of the marketing and all of the discourse around this is, oh, like this is giving a voice to abused women everywhere. And like the actors involved are talking about how important this movie is and how important this topic is and how, it shines a light on this important thing. And like, it's my usual complaint of, if you want to do that, shouldn't you try to make it more real? Shouldn't you try to show, like, for example, let's say your neighbors or somebody in your family is in an abusive relationship like this, right? Like controlling, stifling, whatever. Like somebody is being controlled by their spouse in such an extreme way. What signs would you look for to notice that after seeing this movie? You know what I mean? Like, this is my usual skeptical response of, is this not just all marketing bullshit? And if it is, does that matter? And if you're actually serious about like raising awareness of this, couldn't you have crafted a story that was as thrilling or as exciting to watch as this, but that actually had more insightful things about it, like what the signs of an abusive relationship are, for instance? I think Drop earlier this year did this much better, because there it's a very heightened thriller concept of you're being blackmailed into killing your date, and which is not something any of us are going to experience. But if you engage with the story a little bit, there are ways that mirror how real abusive relationships actually work, right? This whole thing about how you have to pretend to everybody around you that everything is normal and fine, and you're always smiling, and everything is always perfect and all of that, right? So if you watch that movie, you can walk away knowing some of the signs of how somebody who is in an abusive relationship behaves. And I don't think you can say the same thing for The Housemaid.
I think the only thing that I can maybe give it on that front is more so to do with not falling for the perfect image, because in this, really kind of fell for his muscles, his physique, his smile, his money, his charm, and this, that, and the other. And it was almost kind of warning that, yeah, all of this might be perfect, but there's like, there could be something darker and something a little bit more sinister behind all of that, because all you're seeing is this like ideal life that you think is perfect and could be yours, but be warned as to what might be happening behind the scenes, or like what happens when you kind of like delve under the hood, like what could possibly be going on. So I think that's kind of the only front where I feel like, okay, yeah, it kind of speaks a little bit true there. And again, it's how like someone will try and like use your weakness to kind of win you over a little bit and then kind of use it against you.
One thing I think this rings true a little bit is that psychopaths like this can be really charming, right? If you kind of look into famous cases, every person who knew them says, oh, they were such a nice person and they were always smiling and they were always friendly and all of that, right? The evil in your life is probably not like the scary looking loner. It's probably somebody who is like a social chameleon who really knows how to play people and people's expectations and perceptions. And that is certainly in here, right? Like Andrew really knows how to put on an act as the perfect understanding patient husband who is constantly just fixing Nina's messes, right? I think that's one of the stronger parts in this. But I actually disagree with you about how Millie is kind of seduced by Andrew, because she has an attraction to him in the very beginning and she just rejects it, just shuts it down and say, nope, don't go there. I'm just gonna keep my head down, do my job. Where she ends up falling for him is when he just continues to be this patient, nice guy who seemingly understands her and treats her with respect and all of that, right? Like that's like when they're on their date, and every time they have this little moment where Nina gets her into trouble and he shows up to save her, like that's how he comes across as, right? And that is, I think, where she begins falling for him. So it's not, she's not seduced by the money or by the looks or by even the charm. The movie sets it up to be a very slow, gradual thing where he does appear to be just a nice guy who just happens to be married to this crazy woman and happens to be her employer. But outside of that, he seems to be the perfect guy, right? I do think the movie kind of makes a point that Millie is specifically not in it for the money. All she does once is to meet the conditions of her parole so that she can kind of recover from this one mistake 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for sure it doesn't quite make it about the money, but I think quite early on it's like the physical attraction, and that's why she's having dreams about him. It's having like those like fantasies about Andrew in the start, but I think it's more to do with her situation of she needs this job and she can't fall for the temptation, and she actually needs to just keep her head down and just like do what she needs to do, keep the job, keep the money coming in,
Mhm.
so that she can kind of beat out parole. But like you said, it's like more of a gradual thing. It's over time where she kind of keeps seeing that, oh, he is a nice guy, or like he is charming, or he like stands up for her and takes up the fight for her against Lena several times throughout the movie, and stuff like that. And I think a lot of the time that kind of almost does mirror real life as well, because not everyone will show you who they are immediately. It is that over time where 4, 5, 6 months, or like however long, like people can kind of keep up a facade with you over that period of time, where you think that they're one thing, and then out of nowhere they completely switch. And I think probably women that have like watched the movie have probably experienced that, where they've dated someone, thought that they were someone for a certain period of time, and then over time like the mask starts to slip, and then the real them starts to come out. So it's over time, but I think it still probably resonates a lot with women.
Yeah, but like there's no, I don't think there's very much in the way of early warning signs or red flags, right? It just, he seems to be this incredible guy until he isn't, until the real monster comes out, right? And like there's like one or two little lines, right? So for instance, when she doesn't clean the plates, like she drops the plates and he's totally understanding, yes, you destroyed my family heirloom that I really care about, but I have a plate guy. He'll fix it. And then he gets really upset when she doesn't clean the shards, right? So that's more than nothing. It's just what I'm saying. But there doesn't seem to be like red flags earlier on in the movie. So for instance, he does not lose his temper at all. He does not get impatient. He does not have unreasonable demands or one-sided demands, right? Like Nina, like we talked about this, where Nina does not seem to be afraid of him. Shouldn't she be obsessed with everything being perfect every time? Because if it isn't, he gets angry, right? Like it seems to me like that is one of the warning signs that somebody is putting on an act, where like how they react to mistakes or setbacks or complications, right? And what expectations they have of other people, and how unreasonable they become when something doesn't go their way. Like it did not seem to me like there was much in the way of that in the portrayal of Andrew, where Millie could have spotted it earlier if only she'd recognized the signs. If that's the purpose of the story, shouldn't that be there?
But that was my point, is that that could mirror real life in terms of it doesn't appear to be red flags at all. And like I've heard stories from friends as well where it doesn't appear to be red flags. It appears like he's like the perfect guy, and then something just switches and a completely different person after a certain point. I do agree with you that they probably could have sprinkled in a few red flags where it's like something that you can look past or you can like overlook, but realistically it was like something that led to something bigger within Andrew's character. But at the same time, some people can like really mask it and like really like hide who they are for a very long time. For a movie sense, yeah, probably there could have been something there, but for real life sense, it can play out the way it played out in this movie.
It seems to me like people like that have slip ups and then they are really good at excusing it. So you can imagine a scene where maybe the house is a bit messy and he comes home from a business trip and he snaps at Nina for not keeping things clean. And then when Millie is shocked, he says, "Oh, I'm jet lagged. I'm sorry, I lost my temper," or something. Like, and they do mention temper a little bit, but it didn't seem to come up like throughout the movie. I don't know. It seems to me like it's too one or the other, where he seems to be too perfect the entire time, and then he suddenly turns into a psychopath, and it's like they're two different characters. And I get that the whole thing about mask slipping, but the thing about that is that the mask slips sometimes, especially when people are tired or under stress or whatever, right? You know what I mean? It just seems to me like if you wanted that theme of image and people prejudging and people judging people by their reputations and that sort of thing, it seemed like that should have been in there more.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I said like real life and movie sense, kind of two different things. And I think for the movie and to kind of like drive some of those points home, I think you probably could have definitely had some of that in there for sure.
Yeah, I just think the success of the movie and the acclaim of the movie comes down to, oh, this is talking about serious topics in a good way. Like, no, I don't think anybody is saying this movie is all that smart. Pretty much everybody is saying this is kind of a guilty pleasure. This is very polished trash, but it's fun but it also touches on important topics. And whenever a movie does that, I do ask, does it really, and is it effective at this, and shouldn't have tried more in these certain ways. We do need to kind of make up our minds about whether or not this is like an important movie talking about serious issues, or if this is just like a 90s style throwback thriller that is exciting to watch, but ultimately it's entertaining nonsense kind of thing. I don't know, like it seems like people kind of want to have it both ways with this one. And I don't know, like it seems to me like those are two separate lanes, and I'm not sure you can really reconcile them in the same movie.
It's all marketing. It's all marketing to get people in the seats when they say about like this talks about
Yeah.
things, or it tries to make it a little bit more important than what it actually is at the end of the day. Is what I'd say. What did you think about the very ending of the movie, where it's almost turning her into like a Jason Bourne or the Equalizer, or like one of those characters where now she's going to go after all the abusive husbands.
Yeah, I was going to compare it to the Punisher.
Go ahead.
Well, like basically doing bad things, but it's okay because your target is a bad person. And it kind of seems weird. Like you want like this. Like, do you really want this to be your life? Why not set up like a network to help the wives, like women who are in abusive relationships just escape, like setting up safe houses and and money so that they can get away and that sort of thing. It seems a bit like this whole idea of violence is good if it targets the right person, which is something that's kind of been becoming more popular in recent years in the real world. And I'm a little, like we had the same thing with The Beekeeper, right? Where the vigilantism is good and the unchecked violence is good because it hits the bad people. And there were other movies like this too. It did not seem like a good ending, and it seemed to be like an empowerment moment, right? Where now they're taking the fight to their abusers and stuff like this. And I don't know, I felt a little bit ambivalent about it because it's ultimately they're going out to kill people, right? Like that's the plan.
I was confused, like kind of even before that, when she trapped Andrew, about the choice that she made about kind of locking him in a room and like actually abusing for someone that was on parole and really didn't want to go back to prison and was like really like that was like her whole motivation, to then have someone like trapped in a room and like to not call the police or to not try to like get out of it somehow. It seems strange, and then to kind of like even push that further to her now being a hero for abused women. I was like, it didn't quite sing with who she was for the majority of the movie in terms of like what she wanted, keep a low profile. It was like a mistake that she'd made previously. I know it does show a montage of like her trying to like help other abused like women as well, like at the bar when like the bartender's like speaking to the girl, or I don't know, giving like unwanted attention or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I was quite confused at that point in the movie. Obviously, for movie's sake, she was never going to just go to the police, and like it needed to like play out the way it did, and he was always going to escape that room and like have one final showdown. But yeah, it just didn't give. This is someone that's out on parole or out on probation and doesn't want to go back to jail.
Yeah, so the thing about the police, it is established that Andrew is chummy with the local police, right? They consider him a saint and they would very much be on his side, right? So that is, I think, too dangerous. Also, at that point, she's dehydrated and delirious and has lost blood, and like she's just trying to win at that point, right? Like in that moment, in that first scene where she locks Andrew in the attic and essentially reverses the table and says, no, now I'm in control and I'm gonna do to you what you did to me. Like on a human level, that totally works. Like her being at that place at that point, I think makes perfect sense. I think the scheme at the end, where she dedicates her life to hunting down abusive husbands, a little bit different, right? Because that is planned and that is long term and that is just deciding that this is going to be my life's work. I do think there's a difference there.
Yeah, I can hear it, and I think they made the effort to kind of show that she was like really kind of starving and thirsting, whatever, from being in that room. But I don't know. It just kind of, I was watching it and I was like, this should. I mean, I think they made like a huge like point in the movie as well to kind of show that she didn't really have anyone else.
Who is she gonna call? Is she gonna call her social worker, who is barely checked in and is just trying to keep up with the caseload? Can she be trusted to help her, right? And if not her, then who exactly? Like she's not made any friends. None of the socialites are on her side. Nina at that point is not on her side. Who is she gonna turn to? Is she just gonna call a random lawyer, even though she has no money? Basically says, hey, I locked a guy in my attic and just believe me that he's been abusing me. First thing that lawyer is going to say, call the police. And then what? And then she's back to square one. So I do think that makes sense.
Yeah, I was gonna say actually, obviously he had a camera in there. So then there was like some type of like recording or some feed or potentially some like backup of the videos that he had in there. So I was like, surely you just kind of show that to the police and show like there's a camera. Clearly there's like a computer somewhere with these files. And I know they didn't show it in the movie of like him having files or like backups or something like that. But I don't know. Someone like that I would assume would have a record of what he'd been doing or like some type of like backup or I don't know. That was like another thing that kind of crossed my mind.
It's likely, but at that point, we are talking about the Millie's revenge and Millie standing up to her abuser, right? So that is why I make such a distinction between just her struggle against Andrew versus the ending where she's picking fights, right? She's deliberately going into this again because it's in her mind that's the right thing to do. So I do think those two are different. Like in the moment, I totally buy what she's doing. Long term, not so much. And I think it would have been different if we had seen other nannies be or other wives or nannies be in this situation. And so she already knows about specific ones who need help, right? And now she's kind of saying, okay, we're going to clean up this neighborhood one house at a time. And we have to do it in a covert way because the police aren't doing their job and everybody's just concerned about image and gossip. I think there can be something there, but like essentially start becoming superheroes at the end is a little bit iffy.
So you wouldn't want to see Millie on Super Soldier Serum taking out a bunch of bad husbands.
If this was a superhero story, I would kind of be cheering for it because that's the genre convention, right? Whereas this is more about survival, right? Where both Millie and Nina are just trying to survive this bad situation, but then once they've solved it, it becomes a different game. And I don't know, like I'm not actually saying it's bad, like, but it's more like the literal minded person in me just says you could use that money to help people in more effective ways that don't amount to infiltrating their homes and killing them in their sleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it kind of ties back to the whole not showing that there was no escape valve as well in terms of like the control and like being trapped and stuff like that. Because like you were saying, if it's just a case of like putting together resources to help these women escape their relationships, then yeah, it's fine. But you kind of have to show that there isn't any alternative apart from killing the husband.
And the nannies seem to generally be clued in, right? Like they warn each other about the families and they kind of talk to each other. So maybe one alternative would have been to kind of create this network of nannies to kind of find the bad husbands or even just generally the abusers. Like this is not even as one-sided. Like I actually expected this to be much more one-sided about which the bad gender is, right? But actually there's quite a few women in this who enable the abuse, right? The mother and all of the friends and all of that, right? So it's not quite as one-sided as it could have been, but just use the nannies as kind of spies to gather information and evidence because they're always there, they're always watching, they always know what's going on. And then once you have the evidence, you go to the police or you go to a lawyer to rescue whoever the abuse party is. And that would even have been breaking the cycle of violence, right? Like, I think the thing I'm caught up on this is that it's celebrating that violence is just plan A and there's no alternative discussed. Like maybe I think that's the part that's rubbing me the wrong way when actually there are other ways, right? Like if you use the nannies as informants to gather all the evidence you need to break open this in a way that not even the police can cover up, that's totally on the table. And I think that would have made the characters a little bit more noble for going a little bit more of an elevated path while still saving people and still breaking the cycle of abuse and of secrecy and politeness that these abusers thrive on, because ultimately that's what's keeping all of this going.
But does it make for a great movie?
But it's just the ending, right? Like it's just one scene. And like imagine a scene in which Nina and Millie are talking to a room full of nannies and they are showing here's recordings and here's pictures that show this. And then we see a montage of a bunch of abusers being carted away in handcuffs. And the nanny just stands in the doorway and smiles with satisfaction. I think it could have been done. And obviously, at this point, we are talking about a different movie. I'm just saying that is the ending that would have achieved the same thing without being so ambivalent.
And without sequel baiting.
That's actually, this is based on a book. And there's, I think, 3 sequels to the book. So this is an entire series. And we're going to get Housemaid 2, 3, and 4 at least.
So I'm guessing this is the path it takes in the book then, where she becomes, okay, yeah.
Let me get you the titles. All right, so The Housemaid came out in 2022. The Housemaid's Secret came out in 2023. The Housemaid is Watching came out in 2024. And then there's a short story called The Housemaid's Wedding. Do with that what you will.
Cool. Well, it sounds like we're getting plenty more of this.
Yeah, so that's the franchise mapped out for the next 6 or 7 years.
To be fair, actually, I'd actually watch a sequel to this. I had a good enough time with this. I actually would watch the next movie, and fully expect it to be super ridiculous and super silly. But I would watch it.
Yeah, maybe. Like for me, it's kind of like it's playing too many games with the reveals and the twists, and it's not satisfying in retrospect. That's the part where that's why I'm so negative on this. Like scene to scene, individual performances, and all of that. I think it's pretty good. It's more like the story doesn't hold up in retrospect. Once you know what the answer to the mystery is nonsense. I think, and that is what kills it for me. And maybe that's different in the sequels. I don't know, but that is what I would expect from the sequels, and that is why I wouldn't, unless we talk about them on the podcast. I don't think I would watch them because I would like this has convinced me that this cannot be trusted to tell a careful story that holds up to basic scrutiny.
Fair, fair. I guess with that, final thoughts.
So I think this is high quality trash. I saw a saying somewhere you can't polish a turd, but you can put glitter on it. And this is kind of what this is. It's like a lot of the pieces are good to great, but overall it doesn't quite hold together. And it's mostly about appearances and vibes as opposed to actually making sense and actually being interesting, actually having something to say. And for that reason, it's a 5 out of 8. Like this, like I did not hate watching this, but I also was unsatisfied and frustrated as I walked out. And this is made worse by how good ratings it is getting because it looks a bit like people are kind of falling for the marketing and for the rhetoric, and it always annoys me when that happens. So I'm not recommending this.
I think, despite its flaws and despite a lot of sort of kind of some of the issues that it had, I feel like less strongly about the marketing ploys that it has and the messaging it's trying to put out and actually what's in this movie. I kind of just take it for what it is, and I think overall compared to like a lot of movies, we kind of review a lot of movies and we review a lot of bad movies, and actually this is a decent enough time at the cinema. And I think it's got like a good amount kind of going on for itself whilst being really imperfect. Yeah, like we said, it's like well acted. There's a lot of like good moments, good scenes in this. Overall, I would say a good cinema. I mean, you could probably catch this on streaming, to be fair, but I also watched it in a really busy cinema, and I think overall it's a good cinema experience. Yeah, I think I give it a 7 out of 10. I think a cool 7 out of 10 is what I'd give it. And with that, I guess we've come to the end of another episode. So if you reach this part, as always, we appreciate you. We appreciate anytime you press play on any of our episodes. As always, if you enjoyed the discussion and you liked what you heard, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, I have a room to show you. We are the Everton Podcast. See you later.
Bye bye.